Excellent. So I'm quite chuffed I've managed to achieve that smoothly today. So quick introduction to McKinney HR if you don't know us. So this slide gives you a quick overview of what we do. So you know where we are, who we are, and where we are if you need us at any time. And we are all about creating environments where people and teams can thrive. So our services are split between improve, resolving conflict, and also our HR support services as well. We take time to tailor our services to clients, and we've got a team of associates who have specialist experience across a range of sectors. So if you would like to contact us, our email is on the slide. And then also like to introduce Nikki and Flexibility Works. So I've put a few bullet points up on the slide there. I hadn't heard of Flexibility Works. I was just saying to Nikki, we met Nikki at a conference and started looking into the organisation, and it's just a fantastic organisation to get to know. And Nikki is co-founder and director, and she's a leading voice on flexible and hybrid working. So both yourself, Nikki, and the organisation in general are passionate about driving equality, well-being and business success through flexibility. So we'll talk about how we can do that today with your help. And you want to help employers create and embed fair, people-centred, flexible work cultures. You offer consultancy, training, and practical support for all sectors. And a really important point is the research that you do and the insights that you have from that research as well. So that gives you a quick overview and introduction. So we'll also welcome questions for Nikki throughout the conversation in the chat box. And we've got Louise from our team who will keep an eye on that over the hour. So please do feel free to put in questions as we go along. A quick spotlight on flexible working just before we kick off. So flexibility works describe flexible working as when you have some choice and control over when, where, and how much you work to help you balance your work and home life. And it's changing so much over the last few years, so many different options nowadays. And I mentioned the research that Flexibility Works do, and I had a look at that. So we've pulled out some statistics that we thought was interesting for you. So their latest report was done in March 2025. I'll pop a link in the chat and definitely recommend you have a look at that when you get the chance. So having a look at the slide there, we've highlighted in turquoise the benefits as well. So better staff retention, reducing sickness, absence, and increasing productivity. We've got a good amount of Scottish workers who are actually working with some form of flexible working, and that's been increasing huge amounts since pre-pandemic as well, which I'm sure you won't be surprised about. But we still have 40% of employers that think they can't offer flex, and there are challenges that they're coming up with. So the top 5 biggest challenges are raising staff expectations but feeling unable to meet those, and not being able to offer flexible working across all roles. So how can you make it fair? There might be some managers who are pro-flexible working, but some senior managers are not on board with it. So it's trying to get them on board. Perhaps some organisations are feeling they're struggling to get people on site as much as they would like to. And there are some reports of that in the news. And if they offer more flex, then will everybody ask for flex, and you just can't deliver that. So that's really why we wanted to run this webinar and look at some of the challenges as well as the benefits, and really pick Nikki's brains to get some ideas of how you can make it work. Because we've still got a third of workers who are saying that they still have no choice or control over when or where they work. So flexibility is out there, but it's not universal. So our conversation with Nikki today, looking at the benefits, real world examples, then simple steps that you can take, especially for small businesses where it might seem really difficult to implement. Balancing flexibility with roles that require on-site presence, and tools, tips and insights as well. So it's all about conversation. So I'm going to end the slideshow just now and go on to some questions for Nikki. Hi, Nikki.
Hi, Rona.
Okay, so I've introduced flexibility works a little bit there, but can you tell us more about what you do?
Yeah, I think you did a brilliant job, Rona, of introducing us. So we are based in Scotland. We're a social business. We're all very passionate about flexible working. I've worked in the space for about 11 years. So prior to setting up Flexibility Works, I worked for another organisation. Um, so been looking at this, following trends, just really looking at those kinds of how can we find that sweet spot between what people are looking for, because we all have a life out with work and we've all got different things that we're trying to balance and combine, and but also businesses, well, have to keep the lights on and keep things running. So how can we find that sweet spot between what people are looking for that help them have that really good quality of life, and what can kind of work for businesses. So you were right, we do research, so we track trends. We've got our new report will be coming out in March 2026, looking at those kind of trends, and flexible working, both from a kind of worker's perspective, but also from an employer's perspective. We're always looking for good practice and examples and case studies, and we do that. So we're always finding those examples, sharing those examples through sessions like this and through our own webinars. Um, and then we do our training and consultancy. So that's, practically helping organizations to move the dial on flexible working. And that could really be anything from, sort of just helping their senior leadership team understand, how could this work in our organization? Demystifying flexible working. It could be listening exercises with employees, or it could be like helping organizations look at the recruitment practices, to help them really showcase the flexibility that they're offering to try and attract people in to the organization. So it's a real mix of different things that we do. We also do training, particularly for managers. We recognise, it probably isn't a surprise to anyone here, that managers are the kind of make or break in whether flexible working works. And I think you said, Rona, there, some managers will be bought in, others might be so less sure. And ultimately, flexible working normally starts with a conversation between an employee and their manager. So, supporting managers, we think, really important so that they can have those really good conversations, understand how to make it work for the business, for the team, for the individual. Make sure they don't get into trouble by doing the wrong thing or saying the wrong things, quite important as well. And particularly with hybrid working being more popular now, it's maybe using slightly different skills as a manager to manage your team and keep your team connected. So we do some training on that. So those are the sorts of things that we do, sort of day to day. And we are piloting a flexible working accreditation at the moment, which has been really interesting. And we've got some organisations going through the pilot at the moment, some more lined up, and then that will launch onto the market in spring 2026. So there'll be a kind of framework for the first time of like, what does good flexible working look like? And for those organisations that think, yeah, I'm there, I want to get assessed, they can go through the process and we will assess them. And if they kind of make the grade, if you like, then they'll get the accreditation. So that's a kind of new product for us.
Fantastic. There's so much in your small team as well. And I'm just thinking the accreditation, that would be great for recruitment as well, for
Yeah,
advertising that you are a flexible working employer and attracting
yeah,
candidates. So that
yeah.
sounds really
I mean,
interesting.
it's a funny one because Lisa and I, who founded the organisation, have known each other for 10 years, and we've gone round talking about accreditation pretty much all of that time. Does the world need another accreditation? Do we need another badge too? But there's not one for flexible working, and that's our thing. And
Yeah.
um, and we used to do awards for flexible working, which were really good, but we wanted to create something that was employee led. So we wanted to be a real sort of endorsement from the workers of that organisation. We want to create a framework to be really clear, this is what good flexible working looks like, and then create some kind of accreditation that employees themselves have got a real voice in through surveys, focus groups. So if you get that badge, if you like, you're almost being endorsed by your employees, not just
Yeah,
because you've ticked the right boxes or said the right things. So I think for recruitment, it will be, we get asked all the time, where are the good employers? Who are the flexible employers? And so
right.
this will be a way for us to create almost a sort of definitive list of here's the ones that have kind of gone through the accreditation and got the badge kind of thing. So yeah, we're quite excited about it.
Excellent. Yeah, that sounds really good. And obviously, flexible working, it has benefits which we can talk about, but it's also becoming just a hot topic, with
Mhm.
the legislation changing, it's just becoming much more into focus nowadays. And there is a bit of a debate about whether making it easier for employees to request flexible working is the right thing to do. Now, we are all pro flexible working, but what's your view about the roles when it comes to requesting flexible working? What are the roles for the employer and the employee in that process to make it the best process, get a good result?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose like the legislation, yes, is has changed already, and there's potentially going to be more changes coming. But people haven't changed, and our lives haven't changed, so that kind of needs desire for flexibility is still as strong. Um, so people have always needed it, wanted it. Now maybe people will feel a bit, they can ask a little bit more, they can have that conversation. Um, and for employers, I think it'll just maybe make the conversation a little bit easier and maybe a little bit earlier on in the journey. Um, a lot of employers sometimes don't really know how to start that conversation. So I think what it will hopefully do is enable employers to think about when they're creating jobs, what flexibility might be possible. So not being pushed into a corner, but really just thinking, well, okay, we've got at the moment in Scotland, 85% of people have or want flexible working. So it's big, as you said, it's the genie's out the bottle. So accepting that that's where we are in the labour market. So when you're creating jobs, thinking, right, is there any flexibility on the where or the when or the how much? And if there is, then just kind of building that into the recruitment so that you're having that conversation up front rather than when someone's maybe 6 months or a year into the role.
Yeah,
I do think though and I've always thought there's a role for employees as well, whether it's a new person joining your organisation or someone who's in the organisation who's now looking to request flexible working. I do think it's a two-way thing. We do some work with, and I do some coaching with returners to the workplace, and I do always say, look, the onus is not just on the employer. It's up to you to think about how this could work, not just for you, but for the business that you're going into and the role and the team and to try and have a kind of adult conversation. So not just think, well, this is what I want and to hang with everything else. To really try and create that kind of adult dialogue and you've really thought it through from the business perspective. So we really try and encourage employees to also take a bit of responsibility in thinking through the flexibility that they're looking for and how that might work.
yeah,
Um, and employers are sometimes a bit scared to actually even ask employees what they think. They say the floodgates will open and everybody will want everything and it'll just all go to pot. But actually, employees are the best people to know what might be possible in their jobs. And generally, employees are pretty sensible. I have yet to go into, for example, a factory and have a um, production operative saying to me, I want to start working from home because they know they can't do that. They can't take their machine home. But they might start to say, but wouldn't it be great if I could maybe reduce my hours slightly or start maybe slightly earlier or later? And actually, I've thought this through and I think the production can still continue. So yeah, it's definitely a two-way conversation, and I think there's responsibility on both sides. Um, and employers can do trial periods, which actually works for both. There's things that can be done, like, introducing, let's try it for 6 months and see how it goes and review it and, that kind of thing. But yeah, both having that responsibility. If it was me, and the question that I get asked a lot with the returners in particular is, when do you have that conversation? Do you have it? Do you have it when you're applying for the job, at the interview, when you're offered the job? And it's really, there's no one right answer. But as someone who runs an organization, I would much rather be having that conversation up front
Yeah.
than when someone starts a job and then says, oh, by the way, I can, this is what I'm looking for. So I do think I can kind of get where the government's coming from. What they're trying to do is not legislate for everyone's got to offer flexible, but try to have that conversation a bit earlier, because if people need it, they need it. And you may as well have that conversation at an earlier stage and work that out rather than chopping and changing and when someone's maybe 6 months or a year into the job, having that conversation. So, but they've got to feel confident. They've got to feel confident, comfortable that it's safe to have that conversation. And that's where the employer, putting it in the job adverts, bringing it up at interview. And I think that's where government are trying to go with this, to just try and get that conversation a bit more out there at an earlier stage, for both candidates and for employers.
Yeah, I think that you're right about the making it easier, because it is difficult to be confident at that applicant stage.
Yeah,
It's easier
yeah.
once you're in the organization and you know the culture, then you might have that relationship where you open it up earlier. But absolutely what you're talking about, the trial, that is critical as well, because we find
Mm.
quite often there's that fear and apprehension from the employers, and you think just try it out, and then actually you've got justification if it's not going to work. Well, you've tried it and it doesn't work, and it feels more fair than
Mm.
if you're saying, okay, well, it's not working, we need to amend it slightly. It's not a no, it's an amendment. So it's yeah, that perception of fairness.
Yeah. And people are frightened to say at interview. And I have heard of stories of people who've been offered a job and then mentioned it, and then the job offers sort of disappeared. So I can understand
Um,
why people have that fear. Um, so, but I think there is a way for employers to start that conversation. And as I said, I'd much rather have that conversation at an earlier stage than further down the line. And a company that we were doing some work with, the managing director was really quite pragmatic. He said, I could just, advertise, I could bring people in, I could say, this is the start time, this is the finish time, this is the hours, there's no flexibility. And people would maybe do it for a certain amount of time, but they'd be behind the scenes, they'd be like scrabbling around for childcare and for all this other stuff. And then eventually the wheels would fall off. The person
yeah,
would go off sick, they would get burnt out, or they would leave, or they would become disengaged. So his kind of approach was, I may as well just have that conversation up front. Because if I'm investing in recruiting, training someone, I may as well try and make it work for them so that we're not discovering it 6 months down the line when they've just been getting by, and then things start to kind of fall apart and that organization's left in a kind of bit of a predicament then, and potentially having to re-recruit again. So
yeah.
his approach is like, let's just have the conversation up front. I won't be able to say yes to everything, but I'm willing to see what might be possible.
That makes sense. And it's going back to those benefits we had on the slide about increased
Mm,
productivity,
yeah.
essentially. Um, yeah, so there's been a lot in the news about this mandate, and
Mhm.
interested in your perception of that word mandate as well. But the mandate on returning to the
Mm.
office, which, there's this big fear. We've been allowed to work from home and now we're being dragged back into the office. So what's your view on that?
Hard to get. I mean, there's the data and then there's the headlines. I think that the headlines are, I mean, when a company does sort of say, right, I want everybody back, quite often that's actually not what they're saying. So I've seen a headline where everybody's mandated back to the office, but when I've really looked behind, what they're actually saying is we're now actually asking people to be on site a little bit more. Then so we're maybe asking people to be on site 3 days a week or 60% of their working time, or but the headline shouts out back to the office, mandates back to the office, and then it sends that ripple effect out. And I know when I see one of these headlines, I'm going to start getting messages in my inbox from organization. Oh, I've seen that so and so, JP Morgan, they're getting everyone back. Maybe I should be doing that. And other chief execs and leaders start to then think that's what everybody's doing, so I better do it. So it just almost self-perpetuates this kind of myth that everybody's been marched back to the office. Interestingly, a report came out today, and I can send on the link. It was the Select Committee on Home-Based Working, which was appointed by the House of Lords, and that was all about, well, home-based working. And they had some really interesting witnesses as part of that investigation. There, some academics, business leaders, and they sort of came to the conclusion that 39% of people are still working at home some of the time, that actually hybrid working, if it's done well, can really work. It's about doing it properly and doing it with intention,
Yeah.
and that we're not actually seeing this huge swathe of get everybody back to the office 5 days a week. And our data's not showing that either. We're still seeing we're still seeing hybrid working is the most popular and topical form of flexible working. Oh, thanks, Louise. I just put that in the chat. Yeah, so hybrid working is still the most common form of flexible working at the moment. And we've got lots of people still doing it. And the average is 3 days a week that people are being asked to be in the office. And there's still lots of organisations that are not putting any boundaries, that are saying, just leave it up to the teams and discretion. And then there are the outliers, I guess I would say, who are the ones that are saying, right, I want everybody back into the office. Um, it's an interesting one, because what I have struggled to find is the data when these organisations do, and there are some that are saying, I want you everybody back in 5 days a week. It's hard to then unpick what's going on there. There doesn't always seem to be a strong data set behind that that's showing they're doing that because of a drop in productivity. It doesn't always seem to correlate. There's a guy called Nick Bloom from Stanford University. He's a really interesting guy. I've been following him for years, and he's been researching this. And I said that actually hybrid working doesn't really make an impact on productivity one way or the other. And he's been
Interesting.
looking at loads and loads of data, global data, on this. So doesn't seem to be getting driven by sensible business decisions all the time. Is it being driven by ego? Are there leaders that just want everybody back? Is there, I hate to say, organizations that are like, well, we're paying for this real estate. I want people to be here and using it. Um, Maybe managers that have maybe had their fingers burnt before with maybe somebody not working when they were off site. And so they're like, that's it, we're just chucking it all out there, no more remote working. It doesn't always logically form that back to the office is based on a dip in business performance. It seems to be driven by something else quite
Recording in
often.
progress.
Oh, little.
Oh, I think, yeah, that's gone away. Somebody
Mhm.
wasn't on mute, but
Yeah.
we're
Yeah,
okay. But
so
yeah, loads
and
in that,
yeah.
Nikki.
Yeah, so I just don't think it's always driven by there's an issue for the business, we better get people back on site. I do think there's a place for organisations doing it with intention. I think we had the pandemic, we were all at home, and then we sort of morphed into this hybrid working. And I think now is the point in time where we need to kind of almost like refresh. What are we doing? How are we doing it? If we're asking people to be a bit more present on site, why? Why are we asking people?
Yeah,
What are we asking people to do when they come into the office versus what they do at home? Because what I do sometimes hear is people that are just like 3 days a week come in, but they're just going in and they're sitting with their headphones on Teams. And
mhm,
then people are like, I don't understand why I've been asked to do this. And then a bit of disengagement sets in. So being really intentional, thinking through what is our approach to hybrid working. If we're asking people to be in, why are we asking to be in? What are we expecting them to do? What's the purpose of that? And then communicate that really confidently to people, so that if there is a change and there is a bit more on-site presence being asked of people, people really understand why that's happening and what it is that the expectation is that they'll be doing when they're on site versus working at home. I think just being really open, clear communication, which does seem to sometimes also be lacking in some of the organisations that have made big change. They've just said, as of October, everybody's doing this, and there's not been an awful lot of rationale behind it.
yeah,
And people are then like, but it's working. I don't understand what the issue is. So yeah, good communication if things are changing, constantly reviewing it. I think we're in the kind of still in test and learn with hybrid working. I think that we'll be testing and learning for the foreseeable next few years, and trying different things, what works, what doesn't, measuring it, getting the data, then making kind of measured decisions if anything's going to change. So that's something that we do help organizations with, to try and sort of almost cement a bit of a process, um, and a bit of a structure around their hybrid working. But it won't be the forever structure. Like, let's do this for now, let's
Yeah.
measure it, and let's look at it in 6 months or a year's time and see if it needs to tweak again. Don't just leave it to chance.
That makes sense, Nikki. And, including it as part of your annual strategic review then.
Mm.
So, what are we wanting to achieve in the next year? You look at your culture, is this the right way that we're working, and make some amendments. So having that structured review as you talk about. So that's really interesting. And it's not just about working parents. I think sometimes there's
Mhm.
that idea it's all about childcare,
Mhm.
but it's not. So who else benefits from flexible working?
Well, there must be lots of people out with parents, because if 85% of workers in Scotland at the moment are working flexibly, then, well, 85% of workers are not parents. So there is a huge number of people working flexibly and wanting to work flexibly for other reasons. When we do our research, parents are still the top reason that people are looking for flexibility. So it's still the kind of top, but there's lots of other voices coming in the conversation, particularly for mental health and well-being, people looking for a bit of flexibility around their working life. And remember, flexible working can be just simple things like starting 10 minutes earlier, finishing half an hour, taking a 1.5 hour lunch break in the middle of the day to get out in the fresh air, and working a little bit later on. So that's all flexibility. That's informal flexibility, but it's flexibility. So for well-being purposes, a lot of people are now realizing actually flexible working or flexibility can help me manage my mental health, my well-being, physical well-being as well, for longer term health conditions, people having that ability to work a bit more, at the times that they're able to work, in terms of the times of day, or being maybe able to work a little bit more from home than we were, pre-pandemic. So health conditions, health reasons, well-being reasons, they're very um, key reasons for people looking for flexibility. We've got an aging workforce, as you know, so people coming up to retirement. It's not new. Like, I remember, like, one of my aunts who's in her 70s doing flexible retirement, and she was, reducing her. So it's not a new thing, but we do have our aging workforce, and there's definitely demand from people that are coming towards the end of their working career, who don't want to just kind of go off the cliff edge and retire. So they're maybe looking for a bit of flexibility, maybe reducing their hours slightly, or, sort of just little bit more, maybe working from home, or flexing their kind of working day a little bit. So older workers, health reasons, and caring. We've got more working carers in the
Yeah.
workforce, so people caring not just for children but for relatives, and more organizations kind of tuning into that and starting to understand that that's a reality for so many of us. So yeah, so there's so many different voices. I'm so excited by the fact there are so many other voices, because when I first started looking at this, when my son Luke was born 20 years ago, and I first got curious about this whole topic, it pretty much was a conversation between working parents, and particularly working mothers. So it's quite good over the years to start to see other voices coming in to this conversation, and therefore employers maybe have to sort of take a little bit more notice,
Yeah.
if they're wanting to recruit, retain, keep people engaged. It's not just a niche topic anymore. It's fairly kind of mainstream now.
That makes sense, Nikki. And one of the key takeaways, I think, is what you're talking about, those little changes. So flexible working seems, sometimes people think of it as these major changes and cutting down from 5 days a week to 3 days a week. How are we going to cope? Those 10-minute changes can make a big difference. And definitely I've had my eyes opened with the caring side,
Mm.
the elderly parents, and relatives. And that is a real growing issue for employees now. So it's good that you mentioned that. So you have given us some examples already, but I'm just wondering if you could work through a couple of interesting examples that you have of flexible working solutions, maybe where it's seemed really challenging at first, but you've managed to work with the employer to come up with a good solution.
So sort of building on that, just 10 minutes, although it was 30 minutes in this particular case, and it was an engineering company. They were already pretty flexible. They had core hours, so you could start any time from 7 in the morning till and work till 7 at night, as long as you did your hours. But there was one chap who's asked if he could flex his hours by half an hour. So starting half an hour early in the morning, finishing half an hour earlier at the end of the day. And that was, he'd worked it all out, still get the job done, no impact to the business. So that was his change, that was his workaround. That enabled him to then pick up his twin daughters. They then were saving a huge amount of thousands of pounds, he said, on after school care. And he just had that flexibility to then go and pick up the girls, take them to their dance class and all that kind of stuff, and just be a bit more present. So just that half hour was game changing for that guy. And just even speaking to him, you can tell that he is the type of employee you really want, going that extra mile. Because while he was saying, I've got all this flexibility, he said, well, of course, if something happens, could stay on, I could come in. I get so much, I want to give so much. And that's, I guess, what you want when you're running an organization. Um, the 4-day week, I guess that's another thing we've been sort of supporting a few organizations with. How do they transition from the traditional 5-day working week? It's not for everybody, that model. There's some organizations would really struggle to do it, and I would always say, like, look at all your options. But there are some organizations that have made it work really well. They've been able to look at what they're doing, how they're doing it, make some efficiencies on their processes, some maybe using AI to do that as well, and giving people that extra day off. But also by having that extra day off, people are more ready, refreshed. They really want it to work, so they're just in working. There's maybe a little bit less chat, but they've between efficiency, savings, and people just being a little bit more revived, refreshed, happier, healthier at work. They're being able to shave a day off the working week,
Amazing, isn't it?
which
It's a
is
huge amount.
it's a huge amount, I know. And we have seen some really successful examples of that. So, yeah, so that's like the big change. And then there's the small changes like the kind of the sort of the half hours or that's the sort of stuff that can make a massive difference. Shift patterns, looking at shift patterns, um, asking people, and it sounds really obvious. But I was working with a company and they were actually interested in a 4-day working week, which is why we were doing the employee engagement. But actually in the conversations with employees, I met a number of people who were saying, we're just really knackered. We've been working in this factory for a number of years. It's physical work. Wouldn't it be great if we could work part-time? But we're not allowed. That was their perception. We're not allowed. They'd never seen anyone else doing it. They'd convinced themselves that they just had to work, get completely knackered, and leave. So it was quite interesting feeding that back to their managing director, because I said, look, you've got these people, and it's their perception that they're not allowed to work part-time because they've never seen anyone else doing it. So he was then able to go around the shop floor and have conversations with people to open that up. And while he was saying, oh God, well, if they did go part-time, I need to backfill half a role, he recognised that actually, well, if I don't do that, I'm going to have to backfill a whole role. And those people have got so much experience because they have worked here for 40 years that actually I really don't want to lose them. Yeah, simply having those conversations, opening that up, and then being willing to sort of do things and try things differently. Um, I don't know if
Keeping
that's.
an open mind. And I saw that. So flexibility, where you say, we'd argue some flexibility is usually possible in almost any role. It's quite a bold statement. I'm sure we've got clients and maybe some of the audience here as well. And I'm open it up to the audience. Put some scenarios in the chat if you think we've got this scenario and we just don't know how we would make it work. We've had this request in. But are there any areas where you think it doesn't work?
It's definitely harder to do in some roles. Like that's just the way it is. You know, there's definitely not one size fits all. There's not a blueprint. Um, so for roles that are you need to be on site, for example, that's taking away all of the element of the where because you need to be physically present. Some roles you have to be available at certain times of the day. Like my husband's a teacher, so he has to kind of be available when the young people are on in the school.
Yeah.
Um, so that all of a sudden starts to restrict it. So there are roles where it's harder to do. But then my husband also had some health issues and reduced his working week to 4 days a week for a short period of time. He's got other members of staff who are job sharing. Um, so yeah, it's just looking for those opportunities. And again, I think it comes back to those conversations with people that are looking for the flexibility. How do you see this working? Like, how do you talk me through it? You know, we've still got to run the business, the school, whatever it is. How do you see that working with the flexibility you're looking for and see what ideas and suggestions come up? So it is harder, particularly for frontline, but I don't think impossible. And I was told I was at an event and it was a dairy. It was a guy who ran a dairy and he came up to me and he said, "Oh, I was looking for you." And I thought, "Oh, great, this is going to." And he said, "Yeah, I'm looking for you to tell you flexible working's loads of rubbish." And I went, "Okay." And it definitely can't work for me. And I said, "All right, okay." And yeah, he's got a dairy, so you know, it is harder because people need to be there. And then he was, so we just started chatting, and then he started talking about his drive. He said, "You know, it's not the people that are in the on site; it's actually the drivers. You know, that's the problem. You know, because the milk needs to be delivered at a certain time. I can't just have milk getting delivered at 2 in the afternoon. You know, my customers need it first thing in the morning. So that makes it possible for me. What are you going to do about that?" And I said, "Well," um, and he said, "Because I can't get these drivers. You know, it's possible." So we had a conversation and we actually, he showed me the job advert and it was very much 5 night shifts a week. That was the job. You have to come 5 night shifts a week. You start at this time, you finish at that time. And I said, "Well, you do have an opportunity here because maybe there's people that can't do 5 night shifts, but maybe there's some that can do 2 night shifts. Um, or would it matter if even the milk came 15 minutes later, if that person could say they could start 15 minutes later?" So he was like, "Well, that would, yeah, yeah, I just can't have it like hours late. That would be okay." And yeah, I mean, if I don't care as long as it gets out. If it's one person on a Monday and Tuesday and someone else on a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, that doesn't matter. And I said, "Well, that's flexibility. That's what you can offer." And maybe if you looked at your job advert and rather than looking for someone to come out 5 nights a week, you said, "These are the shifts. Tell us what you can do." You might find you might get a different result from that. So that kind of to me was flexibility for that chap. And he said he would do that. And I'm yet to hear whether it did change his drivers. But I do
He's
know I
not kept in
care.
contact.
I do know I care. Well, I did contact him recently actually to let me know how you're getting on. But I do know a care organisation that took that approach. So they were always recruiting, open recruitment all the time, churn, churn, churn. And then but they were always recruiting for specific times of the day. And then they changed their whole approach. They just went, "You know, we're always going to be recruiting. We've got quite a few care homes. What we want is people that have got our values, that get our organisation." And they changed their whole approach and they just said, "Look, this is who we are. This is what we do. We can't promise you, but if you align with our values, we will try and make something work." And sort of 9 out of 10 times they were able to find a match between someone coming forward and saying, "Look, this is what I can do," and what one of their care homes might be looking for, rather than trying to say, "Well, these are just the times that I'm looking for someone." So yeah, they took a slightly different approach. and got different people applying. And staying longer is what they also said. When people were in and they were placed in the hours that worked for them, they were more likely to stay, therefore reducing the churn and the cost of constant recruitment, and obviously benefiting the people that they were supporting and caring for.
That's some great examples, Nikki. And it's so interesting, job sharing. I don't
Mhm.
see that much
No,
about job
I
sharing. It's
know,
one kind of flexible working
I know,
type that I think would be brilliant if
I
we could
know,
get into more
I know,
adverts,
I
because
know.
there must be people out there, and it
Mhm.
would be more of a challenge to try, and you need to have, a bigger workforce to try and match people up and things like that. But that's a fantastic example of the care
Yeah.
organization using that approach.
Yeah, job shares definitely. I I'm always really surprised. I've done 3 job shares in my career, and it's been brilliant. It's been amazing. It's enabled me to work at senior level and be with and present for my 3 boys when they were growing up. So, um, yeah, it takes a bit of work to get it established, and it does actually cost a little bit more money because you need to then have an overlap period between your job shares. But when you get that right, the benefits you get, because those job share, they just spur each other on. 2 brains, better than one, all that stuff, 2 different skill sets. Someone goes on holiday, boom, someone else is there.
Yeah,
I remember working with a job share couple, and one of them unfortunately got quite um, unwell and went off on long-term sick. But because they were a job share, the other one was straight in there to kind of keep the wheels running, keep the wheels
oh,
turning in the job share. And what I know from job shares, they tend to rely less on their manager because they sort of work things out between them. They've got that buddy, that ally, so it frees up the manager to then
yeah,
do other stuff. Um, and there are so many people that I think are looking for that model of working, and
yeah,
particularly for women. And I think in senior roles, for any organization that's looking to try and attract and retain more senior women, I think job share is part of the solution. And there's lots of stuff that you can do as an organization to help cement that job share, to set it up in the first place, but to help that job share work well together with a little bit of time investment. I think you can get quite a machine out of a job share. Yeah, I'd love to see more of that.
yeah. Me too, and that's really interesting. So, hopefully, if any of the audience are interested in looking that option, they can reach out to Flexibility Works. So I'm conscious of time, as we've always got so many more
Mhm.
questions I'd love to ask you. And you've mentioned how businesses can go about starting. So obviously the engagement piece is really important, the conversations, being open-minded, manager training. But is there anything else about, how to start um, looking at implementing flexible working in your organization? Anything else you would
Mm.
give over as top tips?
Yeah, starting the conversation, not being afraid, because I don't know how else you can really find out what's working and what's not working in your organization. But you can do it in a way where you're not opening the floodgates. You can just start to have those sort of sensible conversations, supporting managers. I think bringing your senior leadership team together. Quite often, what I find is you've maybe got 1 or 2 sort of champions, and then there's others that are like, oh, I'm not so sure. So actually, just having a grown-up conversation at leadership level about even what do you interpret flexible working to mean, and aligning your conversation with your business strategy. So it's not a different thing. It's not another thing. It's like, okay, so so I always, when I'm working with companies, when I'm getting to know them, like, what are you trying to achieve? What's your KPIs? What's your business strategy at the moment? What are your big challenges? And then if they talk about things like, well, it's we want growth, we want growth, therefore we need more people, then you can start to align the conversation to, okay, well, flexible working potentially could open up that opportunity to attract more. So trying to align it with the kind of business strategy, get your senior people around the table, support for managers, start the conversation in a sensible way, bringing employees into the conversation without promising the world, I think is totally possible. Um, and just maybe starting small, like it doesn't need to be whole scale change. Like I noticed some of theirs just I saw some about shifts popping up. So I think for shift workers, what we hear for them is flexibility might not be the right word actually, but what makes a difference to their work-life balance is actually just knowing when they're going to be working, getting a good advance notice of their shifts, being able to easily swap shifts or maybe lock down a shift. So if they can only work day shift, they only get put on day shift. So, starting to start maybe with small things like that, even if you're maybe working in an organization that's got shifts, like are we giving people enough notice or are we constantly putting Rona on night shift when Rona keeps saying I can't do a night shift and Rona's getting burnt out and is just about to leave the organization. So, it can just be little things. It doesn't need to be whole scale change, like introducing 4-day weeks and things like that. Just maybe starting small little changes can start to make a difference. And measuring, I always say measure impact um because you want to know that what you're doing is working, and it's hard because other things might be influencing, but how will you know if what you've done's had a good impact on your business? What things could you be measuring and start to be looking at, recruitment, retention, absenteeism, all of those kind of things. Particularly good if you want to maybe report back to your board. We've
Yeah.
done all this stuff and actually we're in a better position, or we're certainly in no worse a position. We do quite a lot of work with housing associations, so I'm always saying to them, keep going with your customer satisfaction because you've moved to a more flexible way of working. Let's make sure that it's not negatively impacting on customer satisfaction. And one of them actually just a couple of weeks ago said, "Oh, great news! Our customer satisfaction has actually gone up again." And the people are and people's like work-life balance satisfaction has gone up. So measuring things can be useful as well.
Absolutely. So we're going to open it up to the audience. I know that Louise has been keeping an eye on the chat box, and we've answered a couple of questions already. But if there are any specific questions you'd like to look at, scenarios, situations, Louise, if there's anything we've missed so far as well, if you can let us know, and we can use this time to answer some of the questions.
Thank you. Thanks,
Oh,
Nikki. There are two questions that you might have seen
can
have
I just
already come.
pause you, Louise, or
Sorry?
I'll get into trouble because I always forget to put the QR slide up for the feedback. So I'm going to pop the slide on the screen so you can do the feedback while we're going through the questions. So bear with me a second.
No problem. Yeah, so you might have seen, Nikki, there was two questions that have come through and you've kind of gone towards answering them. The first one was from Zoe asking for some ideas on increasing the flexible working offer for frontline workers. So the example she's given was those who maybe work in care, support roles or hospitality and they're working shifts. So you did start to mention a couple of things that might work there.
Yep. So again, it is harder to, I would say, because there's maybe slightly less options, but definitely just thinking about if there's not flexibility on the where, because these workers need to come in to do their job. Is there any flexibility on the hours that they work in terms of the start times, the finish times? Um, is there any flexibility on how long they work? It doesn't need to be full time. Is there part-time opportunities? If it's shift workers, again, those things like are people getting good notice of their shifts? Are people able to change their shifts? Are they able to have input into their shifts? Those are all the things that people say do make a huge difference when they're doing those frontline roles. We did a bit of research a few years ago. We spoke to 1,000 frontline workers, and those were the things that said make a difference to their lives. It's not even so much flexibility, it's actually reliability of knowing when I'm working, when I'm not working, even not being put under pressure to do overtime. Those are the sorts of things that people said made a really big difference to their work life. So I can maybe share that report specifically about flex and frontline roles.
That would be great. Yeah, thank you. Great. And then we had another question from Nicola, and you were talking about this just towards the end of what you were saying there. What approaches have you seen that shift the dial to embrace hybrid working when the leadership mindset is the main barrier? So she's saying where leaders are hesitant to implement flexible working because they see it as a risk or they can't fully trust people when they're not visible. How would we go about making that first step to shift the dial when talking alone doesn't appear to be changing leaders' mindset?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a leadership team that are not bought in, it's a tough gig, because as we know, a lot comes from the top. Um, so is there one person in the senior leadership team that is bought in? Can we find an ally is quite often quite often we're working with maybe like HR managers and directors. So like, do they have an ally? Is there one person in that leadership team that gets it? Could they be an ally? Could we then data, using data? So there's so much data out there at the moment about people that are looking for hybrid working, um, the non-negative effects of productivity. So is it a leadership team that are influenced by data? So can we create a business case around data? Sometimes it's stories. Do you realize that we've recruited these amazing people in the business because of our hybrid working, or actually there's a real risk that we might lose people within the business because of if we were to take away that hybrid working. Stories like the difference hybrid making working to people's lives. Some leaders are like those kind of personal stories. So I was just trying to find out like what's going to float their boat. Have we got an ally that we can work with? Is it data? And there's so much data. Um, are there stories within the organization that might win leaders over? If there's trust issues, then trying to break that down, why are they there? And that's where it kind of moves out of a flexible working conversation into maybe something else. Are there trust issues there because maybe there is performance issues, and that moves into maybe how do we manage performance, or we don't set objectives, so we don't really know what good looks like. So that's moves into a kind of objective setting piece, the kind of work that McKinney probably does, and not so much us, in helping organizations with performance and objective setting and all of that kind of thing. But yeah, building a strong business case. And I mean, I suppose sometimes you have to accept you won't win everybody over. And like, organizations and leaders have got a choice. This is the way the world is going. More and more people are looking for flexibility. Younger people are looking for it. They're asking at interview. They're looking at organizations that haven't adapted, like they're dinosaurs. So I guess you can go, well, what kind of organization do you want to be? Like, do we want to be progressive, modern, forward thinking, getting the best talent, or do we want to dig our heels in? And if we do dig our heels in and we don't adapt and we don't embrace hybrid working, then I guess we just need to accept that maybe we won't attract the best talent, or we won't have the highest engagement scores. And maybe that sounds a little bit like throwing the toys out the pram, but actually like saying to leaders, like, you're not being forced to do this, but here's all the reasons why we think it should be done, and all the benefits we're likely to get, and all the benefits our people are likely to get. And here's actually some of the risks of not doing it. Sometimes you have to play the carrot and the stick, I guess, a little bit.
True. Thank you so much. I'm obviously conscious of time, but we've got one final question there, which I find quite interesting. This is from Sarah. And she said, first of all, she's looking forward to the accreditation.
Yep.
But she's asked you, Nikki, what would your benchmark for hybrid be? Because when taking home working into account, we're seeing a lot of jobs that are advertised as hybrid, but it's only one day at home. What are your thoughts there?
I mean, I suppose the hybrid definition is it combining office and home. And I think a lot of organizations are calling themselves hybrid, but they're actually, to my mind, more remote first organizations. So they very rarely come into the office. And I think hybrid in its truest form is you're combining working in the office and working at home. I don't think I can put a definitive, the perfect thing is 2 days or 3 days or one day, because it really depends on the job, the team, so many different factors. And that's why you really need to get, I guess, people like us in to help you try and work out what does your perfect hybrid look like for your team or for your business. Um, the average, as I said, at the moment is sitting about 3 days a week in the office. Um, but I think you need to do a little bit of understanding what's the best model for this team. But it's definitely combining home and office. And if that's one day a week and you've really thought that out, then I guess maybe that's your hybrid. But I just think be wary of saying hybrid when actually you've moved to actually more of a remote first model, which is everybody works off site, but they come in occasionally. That to me is remote first rather than hybrid. So be really clear about what are you? Are you remote first? Are you hybrid? If you're hybrid, there is an expectation that people will be regularly in the office. And the average at the moment, as I said, is 3 days roughly a week. But think about what your hybrid model looks like for your team, depending on what it is that you do.
Thank you. That's brilliant. And that's all the questions that we've got at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect timing, Louise. So Nikki, yeah, just massive thanks. So interested to hear more about the accreditation, as the audience have been saying. And yeah, we could go on, but I'm glad that we got some audience time for questions. So it's just been a brilliant conversation. So thanks to everyone for coming along, and we'll close off the webinar just now.
Thank you. Okay, bye.